It's time for the game that takes you back in time. Let's go back. And now, here's the host of Let's Go Back, Scott Sternberg.
Thank you very much. How are you doing? How are you out there? Welcome to Let's Go Back. We have some great questions today and some players here who think they know the answers. We have Steve and Dan and Margaret. How do you feel today?
Great.
Terrific.
Okay, Steve, tell us about yourself.
My name's Steve Liebus. I am a recent transplant to Los Angeles from San Francisco, where I moved down with my wife and one child. Left one in San Francisco and a new one since we've been here.
Anything else you can add to that?
No more on the way. None are planned, thanks.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know that, Steve. How about nostalgia? Which decade are you the strongest in?
Most definitely the 70s. Most definitely the 70s. Those were the wonder years. I wondered how I got there, how I survived them, and really overall grew up in them.
Well, good luck today. Hopefully 70s will be strong for you. Dan.
I'm Dan Falmley, and I'm a Mr. Mom right now with a 2.5-year-old boy who's awesome.
Really?
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
That's
He's
nice.
wonderful. Tell you.
And as Mr. Mom, what do you enjoy the most? The laundry, the dishes, making the beds, what?
Teaching him to play baseball. That's what I like doing.
But other than that, the laundry, the beds, the thing.
Well, I took good lessons. I watch soaps like my wife used to, and do well with that.
Okay, good.
Laundry's okay, though.
All right, good luck to you today,
All
Dan.
right, thank you.
Margaret, how are you doing in a bright green sweater?
Well, it's my lucky bright green sweater.
Oh, good.
Oh.
My name is Margaret Hernandez, and I'm a student at Cal State LA. I'm from Bellflower, California.
And a nostalgia nut?
Yes, a nostalgia nut. I love to collect little knickknacks and things. I have a Roy Rogers Dale Evans lunch pail and matching thermos.
I had a Roy Rogers lunch
You
pail. I
did?
swear I did. Honest to God, what are those worth now these days?
I don't know. I'm not selling mine.
Okay. Well, good luck to you today. Margaret, Dan, and Steve, we're going to take a look at the categories now for round number 1. And they are Leading Ladies of Film, The Beatles, Teamwork, Switching Sexes, and TV by the numbers. 10 points for each correct answer. We're going to take 10 points away if you don't get it right. We also have a hidden time capsule behind one of our decades with a great prize. Charlie O, tell us what's hidden.
Let's go back.
Everybody liked President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And these 3 pieces of history will let you show just how much. Included in this set is the Ike in 56 button, the I Like Ike tie clip, and the very rare Ike earrings. Never before has a Republican been accessorized quite like this. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, before the show, we drew some numbers, and Steve, you won. Therefore, you get to pick the first decade, the first category, and let's go back.
Well, let's get lucky. I like Ike, too. How about the 70s, the Beatles?
All right, the Beatles, my favorite. In 1974, John Lennon recorded this #1 song with the help of Elton John. Oh, tough one right off the bat. Whatever gets you through the night. Okay, Steve, go again.
Well, let's see. That didn't work. Let's go, 60s, Switching Sexes. That sounds interesting.
Okay, from the Beatles to sexes. One of the most famous characters created by this wacky comedian was sweet little old Maude Frickert. Dan.
Jonathan Winters?
Yes, Jonathan Winters,
Right.
you're on the board. First, Dan, pick again.
Let's stick with Switching Sexes for the 50s.
When Uncle Milty put on a dress on national TV, he became a major star for this sponsor. Steve.
Texaco.
Yes, Texaco, the Texaco Star Theater. Go again.
Let's do 70s, TV by the numbers, please.
What sexy 70s sitcom was based on a British series, A Man About the House? Dan.
Three's Company?
Yeah, it was Three's Company.
right.
Good. You're in the lead. Go again.
Let's try Leading Ladies of the Film for the 60s.
When Patty Duke won Best Supporting Actress for playing Helen Keller, this star won Best Actress as Annie Sullivan. Margaret.
Anne Bancroft.
And your green sweater, correct. 10 points, you're on the board. Go again, Margaret.
Okay, Scott, let's go back to the 80s for Leading Ladies of Film.
It was her second Best Actress Oscar that caused her to say, "You like me, you really like me." Margaret.
Sally Field.
Yes, it was Sally Field. You remember the name of the film?
For the second Oscar, it was Places in the Heart.
Yes, Places in the Heart. Great. Let's take a break right here in round number 1. Let's take a look at the scores. Margaret and Dan tied for lead with 20. Steve has 10. We'll be back with more of Let's Go Back right after this.
Let's go
Once again, more of Let's Go Back with Scott Sternberg.
Okay, welcome back. We're in the middle of round number 1 with Margaret and Dan Tyfordley. Before we go any further, though, give us a little story on that sweater. It's so green.
Well, actually, I paid 90 cents for it at a thrift store.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, good. Well, hopefully it'll bring you more luck today. You're in the lead, and you have control, so why don't you go? Pick again.
Okay, Scott, let's see. Let's go back to the 70s for leading ladies of film.
She started a fashion trend as Annie Hall. Margaret.
Diane Keaton.
Yes, it was Diane Keaton. And now, Margaret, you have the lead. Pick again.
Okay, that's my lucky category, so let's go back to the 50s for leading ladies of film.
Closing out this category, she won her only Oscar for playing a princess who runs off on a Roman holiday. Margaret.
Audrey Hepburn.
Yes, Audrey Hepburn's good.
category.
Doing well now,
All
Margaret.
right.
That sweater is paying off.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna try the 60s for the Beatles.
The press gave the radical hairstyle worn by the Beatles this name. Steve.
Mop tops.
Mop top is right. Did you have a mop top in the 60s?
No, in the 16s, I don't think my parents would have permitted that.
I see.
I was a little young yet.
You were too young.
Too
Okay.
young to say no. Oh,
Okay, Steve, go.
I learned. 80s, please. The Beatles.
Beatles in the 80s. John and Yoko were residents of this famous New York building. Steve.
The Dakota.
Yes, they lived in the Dakota. Pick again.
Let's try 70s teamwork, please.
Lieutenant Mike Stone and Detective Steve Keller were the popular police team on this series. Margaret.
The Streets of San Francisco.
Yes, it was the streets in San Francisco. Carl Malden was Stone and Michael Douglas was Keller. Do you know who replaced Michael Douglas when he left?
Yes, it was Richard Hatch.
Oh, she's good. Richard Hatch is right.
All
Correct
my
answer.
children.
Okay, Margaret, pick again.
Okay, well, let's go back to the 80s for teamwork.
Okay. On Miami Vice, Don Johnson played Sonny Crockett and Philip Michael Thomas played this character. Dan.
Tubbs?
Yes, Rico Tubbs. 10 more points for you, Dan. Pick again.
Okay, let's get rid of the Beatles in the 50s.
Let's get rid of the Beatles.
Get rid of the Beatles.
I'll never get rid of the Beatles. In 1957, 4 years before the Beatles became its house band, this hotspot opened in Liverpool. Dan.
Cavern?
Yes, the Cavern Club. Go again, Dan.
Okay, switching sexes for the 70s.
And it's the time capsule, Dan. All right, this time capsule is going to be worth 20 points. You also have a chance for the I Like Ike gift set.
Want it.
Okay.
Want it.
This is going to be for you. Margaret, Steve, you got to sit this one out. Remember, we're not taking any points away if you miss it. 70s, switching sexes. Corporal Klinger wore women's clothes hoping to be discharged on a Section 8, which would send him back to what hometown?
Toledo.
Toledo, Ohio is right. Good, Dan. Good job.
Had to remember that
That's good. And Steve knew that as well. Okay, now, Dan, you have control. Pick again.
Okay, let's do TV by the numbers for the 60s.
Martin Milner and George Maharis tooled around the country via this highway. Dan.
Route 66.
Yes, it was Route 66. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, let's stick with TV by the numbers for the 50s.
Back in the 50s, this was the business address and title of the popular weekly series starring Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Dan again.
77 Sunset Strip.
Yes, it was 77 Sons of Strip. Who else was in that show? You remember?
Oh, Eddie Kooky Burns?
Ed Kooky Burns.
Okay.
Remember Roger Smith?
Yeah.
Married to
Margaret. Oh, what was her
Margaret
name?
Ann or...
Ann Margaret. She
That's
could
good,
dance.
Dan. That's right.
Bye-bye Birdie. That's it. Bye-bye Birdie.
Okay, Dan, still in control. Pick again.
Teamwork for the 60s.
Adam West played Batman on the 60s series, but who played Robin? Dan?
Burt Ward.
Burt Ward.
Right.
Right. Go.
Teamwork for the 50s.
Closing out this category, on the Honeymooners, Ralph was married to Alice and Norton was married to this woman. Dan again.
Trixie?
Yeah, Trixie.
All right.
Played by?
No clue. No clue.
No clue.
Trixie.
Joyce Randolph.
I should have
Some
known
extra
that.
stuff for you. Go again, Dan.
Okay, TV by the numbers for the 80s.
Okay. Jeff Goldblum and Ben Vereen played a stockbroker and a con artist in this series. Dan.
10 Speed and Brown Shoes.
Yes, 10 Speed and Brown Shoe. Good for you. Last question now, round number 1. 80s, switching sexes. Tom Hanks, disguised as Buffy, shared a room in an all-girl hotel with Hildegard, played by this co-star. Margaret.
Peter Scolari.
Yes, Peter Scolari and bosom buddies. And that's the end of round number 1. Let's take a look at the scores. Dan and Lee with 110. Margaret's got 60. Steve's got 30. We'll be back with round number 2 where everything doubles. And we'll do that right after this.
Shoot. Whoa, whoa, shoot. 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 Let's go back.